what typically happens with normal requests from HTTP, you make a call out to the server, but you end up making multiple calls, and you have to have some server-side repository of objects that you keep going back to, rather like a shopping basket or a request object, something that every time you go back there you say, oh hi, remember me, what's all my data? And you have this server-side set of attributes that you've saved from your last call. Now REST intends to be stateless, in that every time you go, it's a brand new call to it, and it doesn't remember who you are. And we'll see the reason for that as well, just in a few minutes. The other approach is how you actually send parameters across. Parameters using HTTP, yeah, you've got city equals Manchester, format equals XML, name equals value type approach. We're all used to that. It comes in a certain format, you have the question mark, and then city equals something, ampersand, another parameter equals something else, and you build up a URL. And we're all used to that. SOAP wraps them all up in XML, and you get a different sort of structure for representing your parameters and the parameter types and the method names. And REST does it different again. It uses this directory-like structure for URLs and URIs, which looks like a path. Looks like a path through folders with all the slash symbols between separate parameters, and we'll see how that's sort of used to it. And REST also transfers its data in XML or JSON, or possibly both. So all data is sent that way, to and from. So it's a bit of a sort of change to the previous one. It's not too difficult to do. It just means doing something differently to how you might have done it in the past. To it. And you often sort of say, well, why should I do something differently if the way I've done in the past works okay? What we're sort of hoping to point out is that perhaps they didn't work okay, and we've had to make fixes around it, and we're trying to adopt a more pure approach to sort of doing it. The idea behind HTTP, when it first came out, HTTP proposed 4 actual verbs. There was a get, a post, put, and a delete. And we've become very familiar with the get, and most people use a get all the time. In fact, they use it for everything. And that's one of the sort of problems. These were intended to represent the 4 sort of basic operations of a create, read, update, and delete type operation. Create was supposed to be done using a put operation, the read with a get, and the update with a post, and the delete, whatever. But over the years, these things are just so that sort of basic idea that it was originally come out with has been forgotten. And a lot of people just use get to do everything. So what they're sort of basically, I've even got that the wrong way around now, to create a resource, use post. That was the wrong way around again. The idea being that to create a resource, we should use this post, and to retrieve, we should use a get, and only a get for that, and you should only retrieve with a get. And the reason being is it's often incorrectly used, and this is the main sort of one trick, because there's often side effects with it that you're either unaware of, or you have to build into your code at the other side to actually do. And then we've got the sort of other ones, so the basic sort of full set of operations aside to it. So we have a look at how you might use a sort of get currently. You might be saying something like, okay, let's get add a user. We're going to run this thing called add user, and I'm passing a parameter called name with the value Robert, and that's the essential get request that gets put in. You can actually just type that in a command line prompt to a server. You don't need a browser to sort of do that. You can just do that in a telnet client to get to it. The idea being there that hopefully you see just through your own knowledge of the words add user, it's probably going to put something in there. It's going to create a new resource for it. Now get was originally intended for retrieval only, not for this sort of update to it. And one of the problems comes about is the use of automatic software in the background, things like web crawlers that go off and catalogue pages. They sort of move around and start to say, well, what's sort of happening here, and remember all this sort of history of requests going in. And also, people often do a successful operation. You do something successfully on the net and you say, well, I'll just bookmark that. And so you sort of remember it for it. The trouble is what happens if you do that again? If I refresh it with another get add username equals Robert, which is supposed to be sort of presumably adding a sort of user, if I do it again, is it going to try and recreate Robert for it? If I say, okay, right, run that add user again, name equals Robert, does that method get run again with a new sort of value put in, or does it need to get run again just when you've run it once? Now it can easily get run again if, as I say, if a web crawler's going round, or you've bookmarked that. You bookmarked it and you say, just reopen this page, and the page gets opened again and something gets called again. Or you go back in your history, and you say back, and you get to a get instruction, and that instruction gets executed again. So what we sort of want is we've got to put some sort of code in the other side that says, well, they've already put this Robert in there. I put Robert in there, and so if it's already in there, then I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sort of put that new name in there. It can get a bit more complex if it is a sort of update rather than a create. There's an update, it does expect it to be there, and you don't know whether or not the changes are just being reinstated or what. Now, using a post, what we can do, if I say using a post rather than a get, the get's just at the top. Now what a post does is just name the method that you're going to use at the other side, use the users at the other side, and we're passing over this additional bit of data. This post indicates that the user is a sort of a child of the user's class that I'm going to add a user. Now this could be in XML or it could be in JSON, it doesn't actually sort of matter. And it's rather like a sort of subfolder idea that we've got a sort of users collection, and you've got this sort of new one put in. And the idea of the post is there to create a new record. So you don't need to sort of say explicitly this is creating a record. By calling a post, then it's going to pick this bit up. Saying, well, that's going to sort of be my new record, and it's been explicit over what's what for it. Whereas the get, if we're making it sort of explicit that the get only does retrieval, then when you're saying sort of get, you can just say, okay, well, can you just get from this users type area something called Robert? Now that makes it look like there's a method called Robert there. Because in how we sort of normally do it, you normally have a project and then a method, and then you have the question mark, name equals value type to it. But if you knew that this was something that was just retrieving, and that the very final one was going to be your data that you're retrieving, then this is just saying, well, yeah, okay, you're using the user's object, whatever the user's object is, define that over the other side, with this value Robert. And the parameter is built into that that string, into that URL string, rather than it being an explicit second part to it where you're saying name equals Robert and age equals something else or whatever. So because you know this is retrieval only, it's not going to do any sort of inserts. We can do it time after time, and it's just going to get the same result because a retrieval doesn't affect what's in the sort of data store. There's no side effects out on it. It becomes this sort of marvellous word, idempotent, meaning it's the same no matter how many times you do it to sort of get round. So what we're trying to encourage with the REST is that you use the correct operation. That you might be saying, yeah, I want to do an update here. I've got an update user named Robert, and the new name's Bob. To put into it, so you're passing the parameters, your fairly useful operation, identifying something, and giving the sort of replacement one. Now that can get fairly complex, particularly if you're updating more than one field there. You might be updating a whole sort of series of fields in either in a particular object. It might be like you've got a sensor object and you're updating everything sort of within there, or it might be a multiple set of objects that you're updating. Here we're saying, okay, can you do a put operation on Robert? So it's out of the user's objects, you're going to use this Robert one, so that's identified which user you're going to have. And the contents then is just saying, well, what that update actually is. But the new user name, sort of, well, this is the replacement sort of point. So it's pointing to the resource to be actually updated and then supplying that update value in the body part to it. Now it does seem, when you start to look at these, well, this is getting really picky, this about it, it's getting really sort of precise about it, but it's going back to this idea of what HTTP should actually be, that they define these get, post, put and delete for a reason for it. And the reason was to represent those 4 basic operations. And we're sort of saying, well, let's go along with that, rather than letting the server side